The summer sun was blazing hot that Saturday afternoon, and the Pemberton mansion looked like something out of a fairy tale. White silk tents were set up all across the perfectly manicured lawn. Crystal chandeliers hung from the tent ceilings, sparkling in the sunlight. Tables were draped in cream-colored linens, and enormous bouquets of roses sat as centerpieces on each one. Victoria Pemberton had been planning this garden party for months. She wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. After all, everyone who was anyone in the city would be there. The mayor, business executives, old money families, and social media influencers who documented the lives of the wealthy. This party would be talked about for weeks, and Victoria wanted to make sure it was for all the right reasons. Inside the mansion's kitchen, Rosa Martinez was moving as fast as she could. She had been working since 5 in the morning, helping the catering staff prepare hundreds of appetizers. Her feet ached and sweat dampened her hairline despite the air conditioning. But she couldn't slow down. Not today. Victoria had already snapped at her twice that morning about the placement of the flower arrangements. Rosa had worked for the Pembertons for almost 5 years now. The job paid better than most housekeeping positions, and she needed every penny. She was raising her son alone, and life in the city was expensive. Some days were harder than others, especially when Victoria was in one of her moods. But Rosa always reminded herself why she was doing this. Everything was for Miguel. Her son was sitting in the servants' break room at that very moment, scrolling through his phone. Miguel was 16, tall for his age, but still carrying that awkward teenage uncertainty in the way he held himself. School had just let out for summer, and Rosa hadn't wanted to leave him home alone all day. So she'd asked Victoria if he could come along to help with the party. Victoria had agreed, though her tone made it clear she wasn't happy about it. "Miguel," Rosa called out, poking her head into the break room. "I need you to start carrying out the champagne trays. The guests are arriving." Miguel nodded and stood up, smoothing down his plain white button-up shirt. It was the nicest thing he owned, though it was a bit worn at the collar. He followed his mother through the marble hallways of the mansion, trying not to stare at the paintings on the walls or the golden fixtures in every room. He'd been here a few times before, but the wealth still amazed him. It was so different from their cramped apartment across town. Outside, luxury cars were pulling up one after another. Women in designer dresses and men in expensive suits stepped out, laughing and greeting each other with air kisses. Miguel picked up a silver tray loaded with champagne flutes and began weaving through the growing crowd. He tried to be invisible, the way his mother had taught him. Don't make eye contact, move quietly, stay out of the way. But it was hard not to notice the differences between him and these guests. Their watches probably cost more than his mother's entire yearly salary. Their casual conversations were about vacation homes and stock portfolios and private schools. Victoria was in her element, floating from group to group in a flowing lavender dress that probably cost thousands of dollars. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, and her jewelry caught the light with every movement. She laughed loudly at jokes that weren't funny and touched people's arms as she spoke, making sure everyone felt special and noticed. "Darling," she called out to a woman in a red dress, "you look absolutely stunning." "Is that the new collection?" Miguel was heading back to the kitchen for another tray when he heard the crash. Actually, he felt it before he heard it. One moment he was walking along the edge of the tent, and the next moment his foot caught on something. The tray tilted. Time seemed to slow down as he watched the champagne flutes slide forward. He tried to catch them, but it was too late. The glasses hit the ground with a terrible shattering sound. But that wasn't the worst part. As Miguel stumbled forward, trying to regain his balance, his shoulder bumped into a tall pedestal. On top of that pedestal sat Victoria's pride and joy, a massive arrangement of rare roses that she'd had specially imported for the party. The pedestal wobbled, the vase tipped, and then the entire arrangement came crashing down. Water and roses spilled across the grass. The crystal vase shattered into a million pieces, and every single person at the party turned to look. Miguel stood there, frozen, surrounded by broken glass and scattered rose petals. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. He could feel dozens of eyes on him, but he couldn't look up. He couldn't move. "What have you done?" Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a knife. She was walking toward him, and her face had gone from gracious hostess to pure fury in seconds. The smile she'd been wearing had completely vanished. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to," Miguel started, but Victoria cut him off. "Do you have any idea how much those roses cost?" Do you? Her voice was getting louder. Those were flown in from Ecuador. They took weeks to arrange, and you just destroyed them. Miguel felt his face burning. I tripped on something. It was an accident. I can help clean it up. An accident? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. This is exactly why we don't have children running around at elegant events. They're clumsy. They don't understand the value of things. Rosa had appeared from the kitchen, her face pale with worry. She rushed over and started picking up the broken glass, her hands shaking. Mrs. Pemberton, I'm so sorry. Please let me take care of this. Miguel didn't mean any harm, but Victoria wasn't done. She looked around at all her guests who were watching the scene unfold. You know, she said loud enough for everyone to hear. This is what happens when you try to be charitable. You let the help bring their children and they destroy your property. They simply don't know how to behave in these environments. A few guests laughed nervously. Others looked away, uncomfortable. Miguel wanted to disappear. He wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. His mother was on her knees, picking up broken glass, and there was nothing he could do to fix this. People like this, Victoria continued, gesturing vaguely at Miguel. They'll never understand what it takes to move in our circles. They don't have the breeding, the education, or frankly, the capacity. They're meant for simple work, simple lives, and when they try to reach above their station, well, this is what happens. Charles Pemberton, Victoria's husband, was standing near the bar with a group of business associates. He heard every word his wife said. He saw the teenager standing there, humiliated, and the mother desperately trying to clean up the mess. Charles was a quiet man, someone who preferred to avoid conflict. He didn't like confrontation, but as he watched this scene unfold, something uncomfortable twisted in his stomach. He should say something. He knew he should, but the words wouldn't come. Rosa, Victoria snapped, take your son and go home now. You can come back this evening after the party is over to help with cleanup. But I don't want to see him here again. Is that clear? Rosa nodded, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Yes, Mrs. Pemberton, I'm very sorry. She grabbed Miguel's arm and pulled him toward the service entrance. Miguel kept his head down as they walked, but he could hear the whispers starting behind them. He could feel the stares. The humiliation was complete. As they reached the gate, Miguel finally looked up at his mother. A single tear rolled down her cheek, though she quickly wiped it away. She was trying to be strong for him, the way she always did, but he could see how much this hurt her, how much his mistake had cost her. Mom, I'm so sorry, he whispered. Rosa squeezed his hand. It's okay, baby. It was an accident. Don't let her words get into your head. But as they walked to the bus stop in silence, both of them knew that Victoria's words were already there, echoing over and over. And neither of them could imagine that just 2 weeks later, everything would change in a way they never could have predicted. The apartment was quiet when they got home. Rosa unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately kicking off her shoes. Her feet were killing her. Miguel followed behind, still not saying much. He'd barely spoken during the entire bus ride home. Their apartment was small. Just one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that doubled as Miguel's bedroom at night. The couch folded out into a bed, and every morning he'd pack away his blankets and pillows so they could use the space during the day. The walls were thin enough that they could hear their neighbors arguing sometimes or the baby crying upstairs. But Rosa had tried to make it feel like home. There were pictures on the walls, mostly of Miguel at different ages. His kindergarten graduation, his middle school science fair project, a photo of them at the beach from 3 years ago, the last vacation they'd managed to take. She'd painted the walls herself in a warm yellow color because she'd read somewhere that yellow makes people happy. You hungry? Rosa asked, heading toward the kitchen. Miguel shook his head and walked to the corner where his keyboard sat on a small folding table. It was old and scratched with a few keys that stuck sometimes. He'd gotten it from a pawn shop for $75, money his mother had saved over 6 months by skipping lunches at work. He sat down and put on his headphones. The keyboard wasn't much, but when he played it, everything else disappeared. The humiliation, the shame, Victoria's cruel words, all of it faded away when his fingers touched those keys. Rosa watched him from the kitchen doorway. She knew what the music meant to him. It had started 3 years ago, almost by accident. She'd been cleaning the Pemberton house one afternoon when she heard the most beautiful piano music coming from the living room. Charles had been playing. and even though Rosa was supposed to be working upstairs, she'd stopped to listen. When she got home that night, Miguel had asked her about her day. She'd mentioned the music, describing how beautiful it was. The next day, she caught him watching piano videos on YouTube on his phone. Then it became every day. He'd watch concert pianists, tutorials, anything he could find. His eyes would light up in a way she'd never seen before. Rosa had never been able to give Miguel much. No father around, no big house, no fancy toys. But she could see that this music thing, this piano thing, it meant something to him. So she started saving. $1 here, $5 there. She stopped buying herself new clothes. She brought lunch from home instead of buying it. She picked up extra shifts whenever she could. When she finally had enough money, she took Miguel to the pawn shop downtown. The keyboard wasn't pretty, and the man behind the counter admitted that a couple of keys were temperamental, but it was all they could afford. Miguel had hugged her so tight that day she thought her ribs might crack. That was 2.5 years ago. Since then, Miguel had taught himself to play. He'd print out sheet music at the library for free. He'd watch videos until late at night, practicing with his headphones on so he wouldn't disturb the neighbors. He had notebooks filled with notes about music theory, hand positions, timing. He was obsessed and he was good, really good. Rosa didn't know much about music, but she knew talent when she saw it. The way Miguel's hands moved across the keys, the emotion in the music he created, it was something special. Sometimes she'd sit in the kitchen after a long day at work, listening to him play, and she'd cry. Not sad tears, but tears of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could be his ticket to a better life. But Miguel had never played for anyone except his mother. He was too embarrassed. Embarrassed of their cheap keyboard, their small apartment, his second-hand clothes. At school, he'd never told anyone about his music. He kept it private, like a secret treasure he was afraid someone might steal or mock. Rosa walked over and tapped him on the shoulder. He pulled off one side of his headphones. "You okay, baby?" she asked. Miguel nodded, but his jaw was tight. "I just can't stop thinking about what she said. About people like us not having the capacity, about knowing our place." Rosa sat down on the couch next to him. "Victoria doesn't know anything about you. She doesn't know what you're capable of. But what if she's right?" Miguel's voice cracked. "What if people like us really don't belong in places like that? I mean, look at this place, Mom. Look at my keyboard. Those people, they probably spend more on one dinner than we spend on rent." "Stop that," Rosa said firmly. She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "Money doesn't measure a person's worth. Those people, they were born lucky. That's all. They didn't earn their place in the world any more than you earned yours. The only difference is opportunity." Miguel wanted to believe her, but Victoria's words kept echoing in his head. Simple work, simple lives, never amount to anything. "I'm going to prove her wrong," he said quietly. "I don't know how, but I will." Rosa smiled sadly. She wished she could protect him from the world's cruelty, but she knew that wasn't possible. All she could do was support him and believe in him. That night, after Rosa went to bed, Miguel stayed up late practicing. He pulled up a video of a famous pianist playing Chopin and watched the man's fingers fly across the keys. Then he tried to copy it, playing the same piece on his cheap keyboard. It took him 47 tries to get through the first section without making a mistake. The next morning was Sunday, Rosa's only day off. She woke up to find Miguel already awake, sitting at his keyboard with dark circles under his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. "A little," he lied. They spent the day like they usually did on Sundays. Rosa did laundry at the laundromat down the street while Miguel did his summer reading for school. They went to the grocery store and bought the generic brands because they were cheaper. They made dinner together, rice and beans and chicken, the same meal they ate several times a week because it stretched their budget. It was a simple life. Exactly the kind of life Victoria had mocked. But it was theirs, and they had each other, and most days that felt like enough. Monday morning came too soon. Rosa had to go back to work at the Pemberton house. She was dreading it. Facing Victoria after what happened, that would be hard. But she needed the job. She couldn't afford to quit, no matter how humiliating things got. "You'll be okay here by yourself?" she asked Miguel as she got ready to leave. "Mom, I'm 16. I'll be fine. Don't open the door for strangers. And eat the leftover chicken for lunch." "And, Mom," Miguel laughed. "I know, go. You're going to be late." Rosa kissed his forehead and headed out. The bus ride to the Pemberton house felt longer than usual. Her stomach was in knots. When she arrived, she used her key to enter through the kitchen door, hoping to avoid seeing Victoria right away. But Charles was in the kitchen, making himself coffee. He looked up when she entered. "Rosa," he said, and his voice was kind. "How are you?" "I'm fine, Mr. Pemberton. I'm sorry again about Saturday." "Miguel feels terrible." Charles waved his hand. "These things happen." Victoria overreacted. "She always does." He paused like he wanted to say something else, but then just shook his head. "Anyway, she's out this morning. Shopping with friends. You should have a peaceful day." Rosa felt relief wash over her. At least she wouldn't have to face Victoria today. She went about her usual work, cleaning the already spotless house, organizing Victoria's overflowing closet, preparing meals for the week. As she dusted Charles's study, she noticed the grand piano in the corner. It was a beautiful instrument, all shiny black wood and ivory keys. Charles played sometimes, though not as often as he used to. Rosa found herself thinking about Miguel, about his talent, about his cheap keyboard with the sticky keys, about how he'd never had a chance to play on a real piano like this one. The world wasn't fair. That was something she'd learned a long time ago. But sometimes, just sometimes, she let herself imagine a different life for her son, a life where he didn't have to hide his gift. A life where people like Victoria couldn't make him feel small. She finished her work and headed home, not knowing that in just a few days, everything was about to change. That Charles would overhear something that would give Miguel an opportunity he never dreamed possible. An opportunity to step into the spotlight and show everyone exactly what he was capable of. But for now, Rosa just rode the bus home, tired and thinking about what to make for dinner. And Miguel was at their apartment, headphones on, playing his heart out on a $75 keyboard, dreaming of something more. 2 weeks had passed since the garden party incident, and life had settled back into its normal rhythm. Rosa went to work, came home tired, and tried not to think about Victoria's harsh words. Miguel practiced his keyboard for hours every day, losing himself in the music. But on this particular Wednesday morning, the Pemberton household was in complete chaos. Rosa arrived at her usual time to find Victoria pacing back and forth in the foyer, her phone pressed to her ear. Her face was red, and she looked like she might explode at any moment. "What do you mean he can't come?" Victoria was practically shouting into the phone. "The gala is in 3 days. 3 days. Do you understand what this means?" Rosa quietly tried to slip past her toward the kitchen, but Victoria noticed her and snapped her fingers, gesturing for Rosa to wait. Rosa stood there awkwardly, holding her cleaning supplies while Victoria continued her phone conversation. "I don't care about his family emergency. This is my reputation on the line." Victoria paused, listening. Fine. But you better believe I'll never book through your agency again." She hung up and threw her phone onto the marble side table. For a moment, Rosa thought it might shatter, but it just bounced and settled. "Problems, Mrs. Pemberton?" Rosa asked carefully. Victoria whirled around. "Problems? That's an understatement. The pianist for Saturday's gala just canceled." "Canceled? 3 days before the biggest charity event of the season. Do you know how many people are coming?" 200 guests, all expecting a world-class musical performance. The charity gala. Rosa had been hearing about it for months. Victoria had been planning every detail obsessively. It was for the local arts foundation, and everyone who mattered in the city would be there. The evening was supposed to center around a piano performance by some famous musician Rosa had never heard of. "I'm sure you'll find someone," Rosa offered, though she had no idea if that was true. Find someone? In 3 days? Every decent pianist in the city is already booked. Victoria pressed her fingers to her temples like she was getting a migraine. This is a disaster. An absolute disaster. Rosa excused herself and went about her work, leaving Victoria to her panic. Throughout the morning, she could hear Victoria making phone call after phone call, her voice getting more desperate with each one. Apparently, finding a replacement pianist on short notice was nearly impossible. By afternoon, Charles had come home from his office early. He found Victoria in the study, surrounded by papers and looking defeated. "Any luck?" he asked gently. "No, nobody's available. I've called everyone. The gala's ruined." Victoria's voice was flat. For once, she wasn't being dramatic. She genuinely seemed devastated. Charles sat down across from her. "We'll figure something out." Maybe we can do something else instead of the piano performance. A string quartet or the entire evening is designed around the piano performance, Charles. The stage is set up. The programs are printed. It specifically says piano performance by distinguished artist on 200 invitation cards. She put her head in her hands. I'll be the laughingstock of society. Charles had never seen his wife this defeated. He didn't know what to say. He stood up and wandered out of the study, needing some air. He found himself in the kitchen where Rosa was preparing dinner for the family. She's really upset, Charles said, more to himself than to Rosa. I heard, Rosa replied. It's a difficult situation. Charles poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. I wish there was something I could do. But I don't know any pianists, and even if I did, convincing someone to perform in 3 days. He shook his head. Rosa continued chopping vegetables, thinking about Miguel at home. Thinking about how he'd been practicing even more intensely since the garden party, driven by Victoria's cruel words. Thinking about his gift that almost nobody knew about. She shouldn't say anything. It wasn't her place. Miguel would be terrified, and Victoria would probably laugh at the suggestion anyway. But then she thought about her son's face when he played. The way music transformed him. The way he came alive when his fingers touched those keys. Maybe this was the opportunity she'd been hoping for. Maybe this was his chance to show the world what he could do. Mr. Pemberton, Rosa said quietly, surprising herself. My son plays piano. Charles looked up. What? Miguel. He plays piano. He's very good. Her heart was pounding. What was she doing? Charles set down his water glass. I didn't know that. Where did he learn? He taught himself. Watching videos, reading books from the library. He's been practicing for almost 3 years now, every single day. The words were tumbling out now. He's really talented, Mr. Pemberton. I know he's young and he's never performed for anyone except me, but... Rosa, Charles interrupted gently. I appreciate you telling me, but Victoria needs a professional. Someone with experience performing for large audiences. Your son might be talented, but this is a very high-pressure situation. Rosa nodded, feeling foolish. Of course, what had she been thinking? Fagel with his cheap keyboard performing for 200 wealthy people. It was ridiculous, I understand, she said, returning to her vegetables. But Charles stood there for a moment longer, thinking. He remembered Miguel from the garden party. The teenager had seemed smart, polite, and Charles had always believed in giving people chances. His own father had been a factory worker, who'd scraped together enough money to start a small business. Charles had inherited and grown that business into millions, but he'd never forgotten where he came from. How good is he? Charles asked. Rosa looked up, surprised. I think he's very good, but I'm his mother, so maybe I'm biased. Could he play something classical? Something impressive? He plays all kinds of music. Classical, modern. He even writes his own pieces sometimes. Rosa's voice grew more confident as she talked about Miguel's abilities. He practices 4 or 5 hours a day. He's completely dedicated. Charles made a decision. Would he be willing to audition? Just to play something for me? I'm not promising anything, but we're desperate here, and if he's as good as you say, maybe it could work. Rosa's hands were shaking as she set down the knife. Really? You'd give him a chance? An audition? That's all I can promise. If he's not good enough, we'll figure out something else. Charles looked toward the study where Victoria was still making phone calls. Don't mention this to Victoria yet. Let me hear him play first. Rosa pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and called Miguel. He answered on the second ring. Mom, everything okay? Miguel, baby, I need you to come to the Pemberton house right now. And I need you to be ready to play piano. What? Why? I'll explain when you get here. Just come, please, this is important. Miguel arrived 40 minutes later, having taken 2 buses to get there. He looked nervous and confused as Rosa met him at the kitchen door. She quickly explained the situation, speaking in rapid whispers. You want me to audition? For their charity gala? Mom, are you crazy? You're good enough, Miguel. I know you are. I've never played on a real piano. What if I mess up? What if you won't mess up? Rosa put her hands on his shoulders. This is your chance, baby. Your chance to show people what you can do, to prove that Victoria was wrong about you. Miguel took a deep breath. His hands were sweating. His heart was racing. But underneath the fear, there was something else. Excitement. Determination. This was what he'd been dreaming about, wasn't it? A real piano. A real audience. Charles led them to the ballroom where the grand piano sat on a raised platform, already set up for Saturday's event. It was the most beautiful instrument Miguel had ever seen up close. Black and gleaming, probably worth more than everything his family owned combined. "Whenever you're ready," Charles said, sitting down in one of the chairs arranged for the audience. Miguel approached the piano like it was something sacred. He sat down on the bench and adjusted it to the right height. He placed his fingers on the keys, feeling the smooth ivory, so different from the plastic keys of his keyboard at home. Then he closed his eyes, took a breath, and began to play. He started with something he knew by heart, a piece he'd practiced hundreds of times, Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. The notes filled the enormous ballroom, clear and pure. Miguel forgot about being nervous. He forgot about Charles watching him. He forgot about everything except the music. His fingers moved across the keys with confidence and precision. The cheap keyboard at home had actually made him a better player, he realized. He'd had to work harder to make music on those sticky, uneven keys. This real piano responded to his every touch like it was an extension of his own body. He played for about 6 minutes, moving through different sections of the piece, showing both technical skill and emotional depth. When he finished, his hands were still resting on the keys and the final notes hung in the air. Charles sat in stunned silence. He'd expected the kid to be decent, maybe good enough for a backup plan. But this was extraordinary. Miguel played with a maturity and feeling that professional pianists twice his age struggled to achieve. "Miguel," Charles finally said, standing up. "That was remarkable." Truly remarkable. Miguel turned around, his face flushed. Really? You're hired. You'll perform at the gala on Saturday night." Miguel's eyes went wide. Rosa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but Charles continued, "I need to talk to Victoria about this. And I'll be honest with you, she might not like." The 3 days before the gala passed in a blur. Miguel barely slept. He'd practice on his keyboard at home until his fingers ached, then lie awake at night mentally going through each piece, imagining himself at that beautiful grand piano. Charles had given him access to the ballroom to practice on the actual instrument. Every afternoon while Victoria was out, Miguel would come over and spend hours at the piano. Rosa would sit in the back of the ballroom watching her son, her heart so full it hurt. On Friday night, the evening before the gala, Miguel couldn't eat dinner. His stomach was tied in knots. "You need to eat something," Rosa insisted, pushing a plate toward him. "I can't. What if I forget the notes? What if my hands shake? What if I mess up in front of all those people?" Miguel's voice was rising with each question. Rosa sat down next to him. "Listen to me. You've practiced these pieces 1,000 times. You know them in your sleep. When you sit down at that piano tomorrow night, just close your eyes and let the music flow through you the way it always does. Don't think about the audience. Don't think about Victoria or her fancy friends. Just play for yourself the way you play for me." Miguel nodded, but his hands were still trembling. "And remember something," Rosa continued. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. You've already won just by getting this chance, just by having the courage to try." That night, Miguel finally fell asleep around 2 in the morning, his fingers still twitching slightly, playing imaginary keys in his dreams. Saturday arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, mild temperature, a light breeze. The Pemberton estate looked magical. White lights were strung everywhere. The ballroom had been transformed into something out of a movie, with hundreds of candles, elaborate flower arrangements, and tables draped in gold cloth. Rosa had been there since dawn, helping with preparations. Victoria had barely spoken to her all day, which was actually a relief. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Miguel arrived at 6 o'clock, 2 hours before the gala was set to begin. He was wearing the only suit he owned, one they'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago for his cousin's wedding. It was a bit short in the sleeves now, but Rosa had pressed it carefully and he looked handsome. Nervous but handsome. Charles met him in the ballroom. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Miguel admitted. Charles smiled. "That's normal. Even professional musicians get nervous. The trick is to channel that nervous energy into your performance." He walked Miguel over to the piano. "Remember, you've earned your place here. You're not doing anyone a favor. They're lucky to hear you play." Behind the piano, workers were setting up a large decorative screen, an ornate wooden divider with carved patterns. Victoria had insisted on it. Miguel would play behind the screen, hidden from view until Charles decided to reveal him. "She doesn't want people to see me," Miguel said, staring at the screen. "She's protecting herself, not judging you," Charles said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "But here's what I think. That screen is going to make people more curious. They'll wonder who this mysterious pianist is, and when they finally see you, when they learn your story, it'll mean even more." Miguel wanted to believe him. By 8 o'clock, the guests were arriving. Miguel watched from a side room as luxury cars pulled up one after another. Women in gowns that probably cost more than his yearly school expenses. Men in tuxedos, laughing and shaking hands. These were doctors, lawyers, business owners, politicians, people who lived in a completely different world than he did. Rosa found him there, peeking through the curtain. "Stop watching them. You're going to psych yourself out." "Mom, what am I doing? I don't belong here." Victoria was right. "People like us, we don't—" "Stop!" Rosa's voice was sharp. "You belong anywhere your talent takes you. Those people out there, they're not better than you. They're just richer. There's a difference." Miguel hugged his mother tight. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. Now go warm up. You're on in 30 minutes. The ballroom filled up quickly. 200 guests, all dressed to the nines, all sipping champagne and talking in that casual way wealthy people do about vacations and investments and things Miguel had only read about. Victoria was in her element, working the room, making sure everyone felt welcome and important. Charles stepped up to the small stage and tapped the microphone. The crowd quieted down. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this year's Arts Foundation Gala. As you know, tonight we have a very special musical performance planned." He gestured toward the piano, where the decorative screen stood. "Behind this screen sits a remarkably talented pianist who will be playing for us this evening. So please find your seats and prepare to be amazed." The lights dimmed. Guests settled into their chairs, programs rustling. Miguel could hear it all from behind the screen. His heart was pounding so hard he thought people might be able to hear it. His hands were sweating. He wiped them on his pants and sat down at the piano bench. This was it. The moment everything changed one way or another. He placed his fingers on the keys and closed his eyes, just like his mother had told him to. For a moment he wasn't in a ballroom full of wealthy strangers. He was back in his tiny apartment, playing for an audience of one, the only person whose opinion had ever really mattered. Then he began to play. He started with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beautiful pieces ever written. The opening notes were soft, delicate, like a whisper in the darkness. Miguel's fingers moved across the keys with perfect precision, but it wasn't just technical skill. There was emotion in every note, a kind of longing and hope that came from somewhere deep inside him. In the audience, conversation stopped. People who'd been checking their phones looked up. There was something about this music, something that grabbed hold of you and wouldn't let go. Victoria had been standing near the back, ready to circulate and make sure everyone was having a good time. But even she stopped moving. Even she couldn't deny what she was hearing. Miguel moved through the piece with growing confidence. The nervousness was melting away, replaced by the pure joy of playing. This piano responded to his every touch. The acoustics in the ballroom made every note ring out crystal clear. It was like the instrument was singing for him. He finished the nocturne, letting the final notes fade into silence. For just a second, there was nothing. Then the applause started. Not polite charity gala applause, but real, genuine appreciation. Some people were already leaning toward each other, whispering, "Who is this pianist?" But Miguel wasn't done. Without pausing, he launched into his second piece, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. This one was different, darker, more powerful. It required incredible technical skill and strength. The opening chords rang out like thunder. Miguel's fingers flew across the keys. This piece was a beast, one of the hardest in the classical repertoire. But he'd practiced it hundreds of times, and now all that work paid off. His hands knew exactly where to go. The music poured out of him like a storm. In the audience, people were sitting forward in their seats. This wasn't just good. This was extraordinary. Charles had tears in his eyes. He glanced over at Victoria and saw that she looked stunned. Her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. The prelude built to its powerful conclusion, and when Miguel struck the final chords, the room erupted in applause. People were getting to their feet. A standing ovation, and they didn't even know who was playing yet. Behind the screen, Miguel took a deep breath. He had one more piece to play, and this one was personal. He'd written it himself over the past 3 years, pouring all his feelings into it. His frustration with poverty, his gratitude for his mother's sacrifices, his dreams of something better, his determination to prove wrong everyone who'd ever looked down on him. He'd never played it for anyone except Rosa. He'd been too scared, too protective of it. But tonight felt right. Tonight was the moment to share it. The audience settled back into their seats, expecting perhaps another classical piece. Instead, Miguel began to play something they'd never heard before. It started soft and melancholic, almost sad. Then it grew, becoming more hopeful, more determined. It told a story without words. A story of struggle and persistence, and finally, triumph. Some people in the audience had tears rolling down their cheeks. Others sat with their mouths slightly open, completely mesmerized. The music was raw and honest and beautiful in a way that fancy technical perfection could never be. It was real. Miguel played the final notes of his composition, and this time when the applause came, it was deafening. People weren't just clapping, they were shouting. The standing ovation was immediate and universal. Even the servers who'd been standing along the walls were applauding. Charles walked up onto the stage, his face glowing with pride. He approached the decorative screen and the room fell silent again, everyone desperate to know who this mysterious virtuoso was. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles said into the microphone, "I want to tell you about the remarkable young man who just performed for us tonight." Miguel stood up behind the screen, his legs shaky. This was the moment. There was no going back now. Charles reached for the screen and began to fold it away, revealing Miguel standing there in his too short thrift store suit. A 16-year-old kid who looked terrified and proud all at once. "This is Miguel Martinez," Charles announced. "He's the son of Rosa Martinez, who has worked in our home for 5 years. Miguel is completely self-taught. He learned to play piano by watching free videos online and reading library books. He practices on a $75 keyboard in a one-bedroom apartment. He has never had a single professional lesson. He has never performed in public before tonight. And as you just witnessed, he is absolutely extraordinary." The room was silent for a heartbeat as people processed this information. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the entire room exploded with applause again, louder than before. People were on their feet, some wiping away tears, all of them looking at this teenager with something like wonder. Miguel stood there, overwhelmed, barely able to believe this was real. He searched the crowd for his mother and found her standing near the kitchen door, tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her heart. And in that moment, Miguel knew. Everything had just changed. The applause seemed to go on forever. Miguel stood on the stage, completely overwhelmed, not knowing what to do with his hands or where to look. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. Charles put a hand on his shoulder and guided him down from the stage. Immediately, people began surrounding them. A tall man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd first. "Young man, that was absolutely incredible," he said, extending his hand. "I'm director of the Lawrence Conservatory. We're one of the premier music schools in the country. I'd like to talk to you about enrolling." Before Miguel could even respond, a woman with silver hair stepped forward. "I'm a concert pianist and I've been performing for 30 years. What you just did up there, that level of musicality, it's rare. Incredibly rare. I'd be honored to mentor you if you're interested." Then came a man who introduced himself as a philanthropist who funded arts education. "Your story is remarkable. I want to help. Full scholarship, living expenses, whatever you need to pursue music seriously." Miguel's head was spinning. Were these people real? Was this actually happening? He kept looking over at his mother, who was watching from a distance with her hands clasped together, tears still streaming down her face. More people came up. A music producer, a representative from a classical music label, a woman who ran a prestigious summer program in Europe. They all wanted to talk to him, help him, work with him. Business cards were being pressed into his hands faster than he could keep track of them. Victoria stood frozen near the bar, watching the scene unfold. Her face had gone pale. Every single person at her gala, people she'd been trying to impress for months, were completely ignoring her and surrounding the boy she'd humiliated just 2 weeks ago. The boy she'd called clumsy and simple. The boy she'd said would never amount to anything. One of her closest friends, a woman named Patricia, who was on the board of 3 different charities, approached her. "Victoria, how did you find him?" "This Miguel? It's brilliant, really, supporting undiscovered talent like this. Very on brand for the Arts Foundation. Patricia was smiling, completely genuine. You must be so proud to have played a role in discovering him. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. She hadn't discovered Miguel. Shh! He'd tried to hide him behind a screen, hoping people wouldn't pay too much attention to who he was. And now everyone was treating her like some kind of talent scout, like she deserved credit for his gift. Charles appeared at her elbow. "Quite a night," he said quietly. "I didn't expect this," Victoria whispered. "No," Charles agreed. "But maybe that's the point. We never really know what people are capable of until we give them a chance." It was a gentle rebuke, but Victoria felt it like a slap. She thought about the garden party, about the cruel things she'd said, about how she'd judged this boy based on nothing but his circumstances, and she'd been completely, utterly wrong. Across the room, Miguel finally managed to break away from the crowd. He made his way to his mother, and they held each other tight, both of them crying now. "You did it," Rosa whispered. "I knew you could do it. None of this would have happened without you, Mom. Everything I am, it's because of you." The director of the conservatory approached them, respectful of their moment but clearly eager to talk more. "Miguel, Rosa, I don't want to intrude, but I meant what I said. We'd love to have Miguel at Lawrence. Full scholarship, of course, room and board included. And Rosa, we have family housing available if you'd want to relocate to be near campus." Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. "Family housing? You mean I could live near him?" "Absolutely. We believe that family support is crucial for young artists. We'd make sure you both had everything you needed." Miguel looked at his mother, and they both started laughing through their tears. It was too much, too good. Things like this didn't happen to people like them. But it was happening. Over the next hour, Miguel and Rosa talked to what felt like dozens of people. Every conversation opened up new possibilities, new opportunities. The mentor, a renowned pianist named Helen, sat down with them and outlined a training plan. The philanthropist discussed covering not just education, but also getting Miguel a proper piano for home practice. Someone even mentioned the possibility of Miguel recording an album. Through it all, Victoria watched from various corners of the room. She tried to mingle, tried to play the hostess, but she felt disconnected from her own event. Every conversation somehow circled back to Miguel. Everyone wanted to talk about the amazing discovery, the incredible talent, the inspiring story. Finally, as the evening was winding down and guests were beginning to leave, Victoria found herself face to face with Rosa in the hallway. They were alone for the first time all night. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rosa looked tired but happier than Victoria had ever seen her. Victoria looked smaller somehow, less imposing than usual. "Rosa," Victoria finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you and Miguel an apology. What I said at the garden party, it was cruel and ignorant and wrong. I judged your son without knowing anything about him. I judged you both based on circumstances that have nothing to do with your worth as people." Rosa was quiet, letting Victoria finish. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Victoria continued. "But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. And I'm embarrassed. Embarrassed by my own prejudice. Your son is extraordinary, and I almost prevented him from showing that to the world." Rosa took a deep breath. She'd played this moment in her head many times over the past 2 weeks, imagining what she'd say if Victoria ever apologized. She'd imagined being angry, cold, making Victoria feel as small as she'd made Miguel feel. But standing there now, looking at this woman who seemed genuinely remorseful, Rosa found she didn't want to carry that anger anymore. "Thank you for saying that," Rosa said simply. "It hurt what you said about my son." "It hurt a lot. But Miguel used that hurt as fuel. He turned your words into motivation. So in a strange way, maybe it pushed him to take this chance." "That's generous of you," Victoria said. "More generous than I deserve." "Maybe," Rosa agreed. "But I don't want to be the kind of person who holds on to bitterness. Life's too short. And tonight, watching my son shine, I realized that people like you, people who judge others based on money or status, you're not my concern anymore." Miguel proved what I always knew. That talent and worth have nothing to do with bank accounts. Victoria nodded slowly. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I've spent so much of my life worrying about status and appearances that I forgot to see people as they actually are." She paused. "I'd like to do better. To be better." I know that probably sounds empty right now, but I mean it. Then show it through your actions, Rosa said. Not to me, but to the next person you meet who doesn't fit your idea of who matters. With that, Rosa excused herself to find Miguel. Victoria stood in the hallway alone, truly alone despite her mansion full of expensive things, and for the first time in years, she questioned everything about the life she'd built. The next morning, Rosa woke up in their small apartment to find her phone flooded with messages. The local news had covered the gala. Someone had posted a video of Miguel's performance online, and it was going viral. Thousands of people were watching, sharing, commenting. Miguel was still asleep on the fold-out couch, exhausted from the emotional night. Rosa watched him for a moment, this boy who'd worked so hard for so long in obscurity, and smiled. Her phone rang. It was Charles. Rosa, have you seen the news? Miguel's everywhere. CNN wants to interview him. Good Morning America called. This is bigger than any of us imagined, Mr. Pemberton, Rosa said carefully. Thank you for giving him this chance. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Charles replied firmly. It was the right thing to do, and I'm sorry I don't stand up for the right thing more often, but that's going to change. Over the next few weeks, Miguel's life transformed completely. He accepted the scholarship to Lawrence Conservatory. Helen, the concert pianist, began working with him twice a week, refining his technique. The philanthropist kept his word and bought Miguel a beautiful professional-grade piano for their apartment. Though Rosa informed him they'd be moving to family housing near the conservatory soon, Miguel gave several more performances, each one covered by local and then national media. His story resonated with people everywhere. A kid from nothing, with talent and determination, and a mother who believed in him, proving that circumstances don't define potential. 6 months later, Rosa sat in the audience at Miguel's first formal concert at the conservatory. He'd come so far in such a short time. Professional training had polished his already impressive skills, but he'd never lost that emotional depth, that raw honesty that had made his playing special in the first place. As he performed that night, playing for a packed concert hall, Rosa thought about everything that had led them to this moment. The years of struggle, the small apartment, the cheap keyboard, Victoria's cruelty at the garden party, Charles's willingness to take a chance, Miguel's courage to step onto that stage. All of it had been necessary. All of it had led them here. After the concert, Miguel found his mother backstage. They hugged like they always did, and he whispered, "We made it, Mom." "No," Rosa corrected him, pulling back to look at her son's face. "You made it. You did this. I just loved you while you did it." "That's everything," Miguel said. "That's literally everything." As they walked out of the concert hall together that night, mother and son, neither of them looked back at where they'd been. They only looked forward at all the possibilities ahead, because Miguel had learned the most important lesson of all. Your worth isn't determined by what you have or where you come from. It's determined by who you are and what you do with the gifts you're given, and he planned to do something beautiful with his. The end.